So I gave him a piece of writing, I guess on Thursday, I gave him something of my handwriting, my scrawl, and he took it to this man. And the man wrote down 9 points about me, 9 or 10. I had the paper for years. I lost it years ago, but I had it for years. Very, very, very amazing how insightful he was based on my handwriting. He was fascinated by my handwriting. He wanted to keep the paper like for the week to study it more. My husband said, no, I didn't ask that from her. I can't do that. So I only got those 9 or 10 things. But on the list of 9, maybe it was 8, 9 items, maybe it was 10. I don't even think it was 10. He wrote down 2 points. 1 point was impatient. And the other point, another of the 8 or 9 or 10 points was healthy except impatient. So like he gave me a double dose of how impatient inside I was. And then I became a teacher and a mother. Well, I was a teacher before I was a principal and a mother. And obviously as a mother and obviously as a teacher and obviously as a principal, you can't be impatient. So what did I do? You fake it. You act patient. So I acted patient for quite a number of years. And I remember exactly who the girl was. A student once said to me, this is probably more like 20 years ago, not 25 years ago. She said, we're talking. I said, Mrs. Stern, can you teach me how you're so patient? So we are in the middle of the mimer of Oosifartem that we started last week. And we explained it's one of the first mimarim of the Rebbe. It's in Tafshin Yud Aleph. It's about 3 months after the Rebbe took on the Nesias. And it's a very avoidic mimer. And we had a lot of good avoidic conversation last week on it. So now we are moving on, continuing the mimer in the next section. Now this is such a preliminary mimer. It's not even divided into oisias. It's divided into paragraphs, not oisias. In the next paragraph, which is basically the same concept, the Rebbe says that this avoida of the Omer we're saying has 2 components. Biblically, there's the carbon Omer and there's Sfiras Omer. Obviously, the carbon Omer is another carbon that we don't do and haven't done for thousands of years. And Sfiras Omer we still do, right? So there's a mitzvah of the carbon Omer on the 16th of Nisan. They would go, the very illustrious people, to observe the cutting of the first sheaves of barley. It would be brought to the Beis Hamikdash, and this was a special carbon that allowed one to eat the new produce. And also starting on the 16th of Nisan, as we know, because this we do, counting of the Omer. And that mitzvah has a 2-fold component. We count the days and we count the weeks, as we know, as we do. We count the days and we count the weeks. Remember last week we raised 2 questions. One of them was, why is this mitzvah of the carbon barley, animal food? All karbanos, all menachos are fine flour. And this grain offering, a mincha grain offering, is barley. It's that and the saita. Okay, she perhaps behaved like an animal. We understand that's the reason, but what's the reason here? So now the Rebbe unpacks this and says that let's first understand that these 2 services, the carbon Omer and Sfiras Omer, are actually 2 different avodas we are doing with our animal soul. Meaning last week we said, we based it on this pasuk, on this verse from Shir HaShirim, from Song of Songs, Mashcheni, draw me. We said that was the Exodus from Egypt, Yitzias Mitzrayim, in the singular, because it's only our godly soul that's being affected. Acharecha narutza, after you, we, now it became plural, will run, because we explained this is Sfiras HaOmer, the day from the Exodus, from the first night after Yitzias Mitzrayim until Shavuos. It's we, because the animal soul is now inspired and she's running, and if she's running, this frees, so to speak, limits of the godly soul to run as well. Haviani HaMelech Chedrav, the king brought me into his chambers, Matan Torah, the fusion, the unification, the oneness with God. So right now we're in the Sfiras HaOmer work, and the Sfiras HaOmer work, as we understand from the verse, unpacked by Chassidus, is the work with our animal soul. What work are we doing? Well, actually we're doing 2 works, because the animal soul has 2 aspects, just like the godly soul. The animal soul has the intellect of the animal and has the emotions of the animal. But unlike the godly, by the animal soul, it's very, very different dynamics and chemistry of the intellect and the emotions. Meaning an animal soul is primarily emotions. She's the emotional soul. Her work is with the emotions. She's an animal. Animals are run by emotion. Instinct, emotion. That's an animal. That's our animal soul. So what's this intellect business with the animal soul? Well, just like a human being, if we would dissect the animal and we would analyze its brain, no matter how massive that animal is, the brains are tiny. The brains of animals are very small because the function of a brain in an animal is not to be a philosopher. The function of the brain in an animal is, how do we get what we want? How can the emotions be fulfilled? That's the extent of animal thought. That's really the animal soul's thought. I have these emotions. I want pleasure. I want food. I want sleep. I want comfort. What's the intellect of the animal soul? How do I get this? Very functional thoughts. So its intellect is pretty small. Its intellect is fairly weak. The strength of the animal soul, like every animal, is in its emotions, not in its intellect. So therefore, to refine the intellect of the animal soul is not so difficult. It's not so difficult because it's a pretty small brain. So what are we doing to refine it? The carbon Omer, that one carbon on the 16th of Nisan, when we take those grains of barley, and we offer it as a carbon, we with that are refining the intellect of the animal soul. Why? Why is this refining the intellect of the animal soul? Well, first of all, because it's grain. We know that grain connects to intellect. That's why our sages say a child cannot speak until he eats grain. Even if physiologically everything's in place, he's not going to be able to compose words if there's no grain inside of him, because the grain is feeding the intellect. So there's this deep connection between grain and intellect. So that's why this is the offering that has to do with refining the intellect. How do we know it's the intellect of the animal soul? Well, as we said, because it's not grains of wheat. It's grains, it's sheaves of barley, of animal food. Oh, we are now answering the question we raised last week. Why is this offering barley? Because this offering is refining the intellect of the animal soul. This is animal food because we're refining the intellect of the animal. So it's grains because it's intellect, and it's barley grains because it's the intellect of the animal soul. And again, the intellect of the animal soul is really weak intellect. It's intellect relating to emotions, how to actualize those emotions. And that's why one carbon, we're good to go. But then we have Sfiras HaOmer. Well, the carbon takes us one day. Sfiras HaOmer takes us, as we know, 49. Why does it take us 49 days? Because we're working through the emotions. And the emotions of the animal are very huge. They're very intense. The animal's emotions are also very in opposition of godliness. Meaning the intellect of the animal, we can finagle it to be on the side of godliness. Like it's intellect. It wants to go higher. It wants to understand. It also wants pleasure because it's an animal. So it wants pleasure of understanding. If we get it to see how pleasurable it is understanding God, we get the intellect of the animal soul on board, but not the emotions. I don't have to teach this. We all have an animal soul. We all have experienced extensively the emotions of our animal soul. So we all know exactly what I mean when I say that the emotions of the animal soul are very, very, very strong. We've probably personally experienced the strength of those emotions. So as such, it's a big job. It's not a one-stop shop deal. The intellect, literally one offering, I refined it. The emotions, literally I work for 49 days on it. Now, why am I working for 49 days? There are 7 foundational emotions. Why don't I work for 7 days? Because you can't just, in this global, overarching way, refine an emotion. That's like, sounds good, pretty words, platitudes. In other words, meaningless. If we're refining an emotion, we have to do so fundamentally. Each emotion takes a week because every emotion is expressed through every other emotion. And every one of those subcategories, we need like a day to work on. So you want to refine emotion, we're giving you 7 days. Yes, that's 7 days create a week. And the week is, in totality, the totality of the emotion. But we don't have the muscles to refine the totality of an emotion. We need to like scrub and scrub and scrub each aspect, each manifestation, each dimension, because the Rebbe says, if you don't do it that way, it's, to use my word, not the Rebbe's, it's fluff. Nothing happened. You're not doing anything. The Rebbe says, if you want to bepayal, if you want to actually make change, you have to take out your gloves, your shmatas, your cleaning tools, and you have to scrub. You have to work. You have to work through every detail. And then the Rebbe says, it's bepayal. Anyone has experienced this, has changed an emotion, and really understands what the Rebbe means by getting into the nooks and crannies of it, all the dimensions of it. No like overarching work that sort of does nothing. Anyone that relates to this idea?
Well, I think I became less emotional work that you have to do together with your spouse in order to grow in that, because who do you use all these emotions on? First of all, your husband. So I think, I think I know exactly what you mean. It's incredible. I had no idea that the Omer offering is actually to refine the emotion.
No, the Omer
No,
offering is to refine the intellect of the animal.
the intellect. Yeah, the intellect. That's right. That's right. Incredible. Wow.
So do you see, Rachel, when you did the work, this point the Rebbe's making, that if you try to just sort of like in an overarching global way change something, nothing happened. But if you actually looked at the details and worked on the details, you did see change. Because that's the point the Rebbe is making here.
I have to think about it.
This is the Rebbe's point, and the Rebbe is saying this very strongly with a lot of words here, that for real change to happen, we need to count every single day. And if we don't count every single day and we just try to do a overarching job, like let's just count the weeks, there says nothing happens. Not that nothing could happen ever. In theory, you could work that way. Just practically, we don't have the muscles to work that way. So for our limited powers, like limited ingolus powers, we have to get into the details of the midah to see a change. Because if we just try to like in an overarching way change it, nothing's going to happen. Now, I do want to put a disclaimer here as I'm talking and thinking about this and thinking about, personal change, because that's what we're talking about. I think nowadays it's easier to change than when the Rebbe said this mimer. We're 2025, 74 years later. And I think because we're so deep in Mashiach times, we do have, and have had, I don't just mean today, I think over the past many years, there's a lot of spiritual energy out there, right? The Rebbe said in 91 that all the spiritual energy of Mashiach is out there. And I think because that energy is out there, change happens much more quickly than it used to. I don't remember where, but there's some source that says that a person could spend a lifetime working on changing one midah. One trait could take a lifetime. That was not meant to be discouraging. That was probably meant to be encouraging. You're working, it didn't happen yet? Fear not. You got a lifetime to change this one trait. But nowadays, practically speaking, I'm sure we all change many things in our life. Like Rachel is saying how she changed things in terms of improving relationships and communication and patience and all the wonderful tools of marriage. And I can think of things I've changed, and I'm sure everyone else can as well. So it's not taking us a lifetime. And sometimes change happens so fast, like I've seen with myself, it's almost scary. Scary meaning like, wow, if that was so fast, I should be doing more of this, maybe that's the scariness. Anyone else has seen that when they've tried to change, or even they haven't tried to change, just sometimes change happens. I've definitely seen myself not trying to change, but doing things that create change, and like, wow, sometimes it's really fast. Anyone else has seen that in themselves? That change actually happens a lot more quickly than we would think. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes.
Can you give a small example for your own life so I know exactly which?
I could think of two things right now off the top of my head of just where I saw change unexpectedly. One was many years ago, ballparking 25 years ago. It's probably about 25 years ago. I was once like just Mivtza Avos Yisrael inspired. Can't think came. I think that was what I mean. Again, it was 25 years ago. I don't remember exactly, but I think I was like just wanted to do something. You know, the Rebbe has Mivtzayim and there's Mivtza Avos Yisrael, and I wanted to do something l'shem Mivtza Avos Yisrael. I need to do something doable. I work all day. I probably work all night. You know, I also have a house full of children. What could I do? And I decided I was going to start making phone calls to people. And I think like if they had a simcha, to wish them mazel tov, something along those lines. I remember, of course, I had no internet those days or any access to anything, so I sort of had to scrounge around to find out the mazel tovs. But I would always, if I found out, I would call, or for various reasons, not only mazel tovs, for various reasons, I would call people like 2 or 3 times a week, just Avos Yisrael. And I did this for maybe 3 weeks, and I noticed a huge change in myself. It was so huge. That's why I still remember this 25 some years later. I remember I started feeling so deeply love for people, like deeply. And it was very obvious to me that A created B. You know, I started making these phone calls and I'm just scrounging around trying to find people to call just to be nice and to, you know, say something mazel tov to them or something nice or whatever excuse I had to make a phone call. And I really saw an enormous change inside in my feelings for people, like such a deepening of my love for people. And I was like, wow. I'm saying it was like almost scary because it was like, I wasn't trying to change. I didn't mind that I changed, but I wasn't trying to change. I wasn't looking to change, but the change just happened. Of course, as Sefer Chinuch says, our actions create our inner reality. So that was like very fast. Something else that probably took years, but also I wasn't trying to change. To give the backdrop of this, when I was engaged to my husband, one of the people on his Mivtzayim route had a tremendous chush, a tremendous talent in handwriting analysis. And we were already engaged. It was safe. And my husband told me what he was doing. He asked my chassan, could he take a piece of my writing to show this man? I'm like, sure. We're engaged. I'm okay with it. So I gave him a piece of writing, I guess on Thursday, gave him something of my handwriting, my scrawl, and he took it to this man. And the man wrote down 9 points about me, 9 or 10. I had the paper for years. I lost it years ago, but I had it for years. Very amazing how insightful he was based on my handwriting. He was fascinated by my handwriting. He wanted to keep the paper like for the week to study it more. My husband said, no, I didn't ask that from her. I can't do that. So I only got those 9 or 10 things. But on the list of 9, maybe it was 8, 9 items, maybe it was 10. I don't even think it was 10. He wrote down 2 points. 1 point was impatient. And the other point, another of the 8 or 9 or 10 points was healthy except impatient. So like he gave me a double dose of how impatient inside I was. And then I became a teacher and a mother. Well, I was a teacher before I was a principal and a mother. And obviously as a mother and obviously as a teacher and obviously as a principal, you can't be impatient. So what did I do? You fake it. You know, you act patient. So I acted patient for quite a number of years. And I remember exactly who the girl was. A student once said to me, this is probably more like 20 years ago, not 25 years ago. She said, you know, we're talking. I said, Mrs. Stern, can you teach me how you're so patient? Like, I'm so impatient. And I'm like hearing like, what? Because my vision of self was that I'm very impatient. But when she said that, I realized that she actually was right, that I actually had changed. This wasn't 3 weeks. I'll give it 10 years of just acting patient and acting patient and acting patient and acting patient. And the mask becomes the man. And I changed. Am I like a star of patience? I would not say that. But was there a lot of change? Yeah, there really was. Just from acting it and acting and acting it. So those are 2 personal examples, Rachel, to answer you. Those are success stories. I'm not sharing my failure stories now because I don't mind sharing them, but I don't remember them. But I'm sure I have plenty of those. But those are just what I mean by like how we change ourselves. And I was putting out there that I think because we're in Yemai Mashiach, what the Rebbe is saying, of course, is true. And yet I think it's easier now than when the Rebbe said it. And I think change does happen more quickly now. Of course, we still are working. And of course, the Rebbe's main point here, which is don't work in this like, you know, overarching way, work in a very specific way, is obviously very true. At the same time, I'm saying, again, going back to I think it's in the Gemara where it says, you can work a lifetime on changing one trait, and that will be a success story. And I'm sure many of us have changed many traits, and it hasn't taken us a lifetime. Anyone else wants to share on this, reflect how they see it in themselves?
I do like what you said about acting it out. So, I could get upset from small stuff, easily. And I actually, you pretend that you don't and you smile. And then eventually, whatever that thing that kind of like ticked you off doesn't do that anymore and change it. Exactly. Acting it is a very good way.
Yes. Yes. The Tzemach Tzedek speaks about that. I think in terms specifically of joy, there's a vignette with the Tzemach Tzedek where someone said, I think it was specifically with joy, like how I'm supposed to be happy, but I'm not happy. And he said, well, just act happy. And as we act happy, really the happiness comes. I've seen this many times in my life. Act energized and the energy comes. Act joyous and the joy comes. It's a tremendous, tremendous tool. So the Rebbe says, based on this concept, that to refine the intellect, one carbon, one day, 16th of Nisan, we're good, because the intellect of an animal soul is pretty small. To refine the emotions, they're strong. To refine those emotions, we need 49 days. Well, there's 7 emotions. We got to get into the nooks and crannies of each emotion, every single dimension, because every emotion subdivides into every other emotion, and we need it all refined. 7 days for each emotion. The Rebbe says, based on this, we could actually understand an interesting discussion in terms of what is the status of Sfiras HaOmer today. Meaning, of course, we know the carbon Omer we don't do today. We can do it by studying it, by talking about it, but we don't do it. But Sfiras HaOmer we do. What is the status? So this is discussed. And some say it is a mitzvah midaraisa. Still today. Why not? We're fulfilling completely the mitzvah. Others say no, it's a mitzvah. Obviously, it's a mitzvah midarabanan. The biblical mitzvah is connected to the carbon Omer. Since we don't have the carbon Omer, it's not a biblical mitzvah. It is midarabanan. Okay, we can understand both opinions. Then there's a third, very interesting approach. And the third opinion says, counting the weeks is midarabanan. Counting the days is midaraisa. Right? Remember, we said the counting of Sfiras HaOmer, we count the days and we count the weeks. And of course, we know this because we do this every year. Counting the days is midaraisa. Counting the weeks is midarabanan. The Rebbe says, now we can understand what this sage meant. The days means, as we have developed, as the Rebbe has explained it, the details of each midah. When we're looking at the details of the midah, we can and must and should and do that nowadays. So that concept, the day of Avodah, we do it completely now, and we should do it completely now, and we need to do it completely now. But then there's also the week counting. The week counting means the midah in her entirety. Now, of course, technically, we say the words and we count the weeks, but talk the talk, but not walk the walk, But we're not accomplishing that. You could say the Rebbe was saying we're not supposed to accomplish that, but no, the point is, if we could accomplish that, that would be wonderful. It would be wonderful if we had the muscles to tackle the entirety of a midah, like the whole week's job. And obviously, we used to, because biblically, we're supposed to count the weeks, which means we're supposed to count and refine the midah in her entirety. But the Rebbe says that nowadays, so to speak, is midarabanan, meaning it's a zecher. We say the words, but we're not doing it. But the days, that's midaraisa. We don't just say those words, we're doing it. Because refining each aspect of the midah, we do, or we should do, or we must do, and we can do. But refining the midah in her totality, that's a higher work that requires a lot more energy than we have in exile. So we say the words, but it's midarabanan. It's a zecher of what we used to do, which was really do both. Because obviously, biblically, we count the days and we count the weeks. So we refine the midah in all of her details, and we refine the midah in their overarching sense. But we are getting the details and the overarching totality. It's just midarabanan. So this is all supposed to translate into ourselves. We're supposed to be thinking as we hear these words about ourself, about our emotional work. Now, I know this isn't Spheres to Omer. Sorry, I just was like, I thought this would be a nice mimer to share. But we're always supposed to do emotional work, not just during Spheres to Omer. And as Rachel said, we have plenty of opportunities to work on ourselves. We have husbands, we have relatives, parents, in-laws, children, lots and lots and lots of people in our lives, which means lots of opportunity to work on our emotions. And we're supposed to do that work. This is real. So what the Rebbe then goes on to do in the next paragraph is gives us an example, like a prototype of what are the details of the midah, meaning every midah subdivides in every other midah. Right? We have chesed shebechesed, we have gvura shebechesed, we have tif'era shebechesed. We have 7 subdivisions of chesed, and 7 of gvura, and 7 of tiferes, which is why, of course, 7 times 7, we have 49 days of counting. So the Rebbe starts, now, of course, we're talking about refining the animal. We're talking about the midah in her not so positive manifestation. That's what we're refining. But there's also the midah in her godly manifestation that we want to utilize, meaning we have chesed shebechesed on the side of our neshama, and we have chesed shebechesed on the side of our nefesh habahami. And we have to utilize one and refine the other. So the Rebbe begins going through chesed, just as an example, prototype, the most foundational midah, and explains to us what is it in a practical way in terms of our own avodah, chesed shebechesed, gvura shebechesed, tif'era shebechesed. What do these things mean lemaisa, like on planet Earth, in terms of serving God? And then, of course, we can discuss on the other side, and we will continue on this next week. Thank you.